By the way, this costs the taxpayer, this training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
Yeah. But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
You're watching and listening to GB News from the newsroom at 11. The headlines this hour. In a call this evening with the US President, he has urged the Israeli Prime Minister to halt his planned invasion of the Gazan city of Rafah. Joe Biden said it shouldn't go ahead without a credible plan in place to protect the 1 million people seeking shelter there. It follows Biden's recent comment that Israel's response in Gaza is, he said, over the top. Meanwhile, here in the UK, the government's also warning there could be catastrophic consequences for civilians if an assault on Rafah does go ahead. However, the Israeli Prime Minister has told reporters enough of the 132 remaining hostages are alive to warrant that ground offensive. Earlier, tanks and bulldozers were seen along with troops operating along the Gaza border. It comes after at least 44 people yesterday, including several children, died in what the Palestinians have claimed were Israeli airstrikes. Here in the UK, the family of murdered teenager Brianna Ghey have today held a vigil to mark her first anniversary of her death. Flowers, candles and a painting of Brianna were laid nearby, with many people wearing pink in tribute. Her mother, Esther Ghey, was among many members of the community who gathered to pay their respects.
Brianna was an amazing, unique and joyful teenager. I will be forever thankful that I was lucky enough to spend 16 years with her. She taught me so much and gave me so much happiness and love. If there's one piece of advice that I can give to any parent, it would be to hug your children tight and never stop telling them that you love them.
Well, in the last hour or so, we've heard that in Texas, a woman in her 30s who was armed with a rifle and accompanied by a child has been shot dead by police after reports of an active shooter at a megachurch. Police say the incident took place during a service today at Lakewood Church, which is known for its celebrity pastor, Joel Osteen. He's one of the wealthiest and most popular pastors in the US. That megachurch, based in the former Houston Rockets arena with a weekly attendance of some 40,000 people, is currently undergoing a thorough search as investigations continue. Here in the UK, a man and woman today were charged after an 8-year-old boy was seriously injured in an XL bully attack. Merseyside police say the boy is in a serious but stable condition after receiving treatment for serious head injuries. Doctors say those injuries are life-changing. 49-year-old Amanda Young and 30-year-old Lewis Young have been charged with being in charge of a dog dangerously out of control. They're not, though, related to the victim. We've heard today that 124 migrants crossed the English Channel yesterday on 3 small boats, according to new figures. The latest arrivals bring the total for this year to just over 1,500. That's down from the almost 2,100 this time last year, but up on the figure in 2022. Apart from the latest crossings, small boats hadn't been intercepted since the end of January. You'll remember that the Prime Minister made stopping the boats a key pledge of his leadership as the country approaches the next general election. The government is set to block bonuses paid to water bosses whose firms pollute rivers, lakes and seas. That new move comes after public anger in recent months at bosses who pocketed more than £26 million in bonuses, benefits and incentives over the last 4 years. The proposed ban by the regulator Ofwat could see CEOs and all executive board members applied. A social media video has captured the moment a large crowd surrounded self-driving taxis in San Francisco and then set it on fire. You can see here, if you're watching on TV, the scenes from that fire. Local fire departments say that fireworks were thrown inside the vehicle, starting that blaze. The taxi was one of Google's self-driving vehicles as the tech giant tries to expand its driverless service across the US, but robot car companies have run into resistance in recent weeks from some who fear the technology is unproven, and they say the vehicles could pose a safety risk. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Sam. Hello and welcome to Headliners, your run through the next day's newspapers with 3 comedians. I'm Leo Kearse and I'm here with the People's Gammon, Paul Cox, and the People's Prosciutto, Nicholas DeSanto. I guess that makes me the People's Haggis.
Yeah, why not? Why not, mate? How you doing?
Good. Yeah, not bad. How are you?
All right.
Very well, thank you.
Cool. Well, that's the small talk out of the way. Let's have a look at tomorrow's front pages. The Daily Mail leads with "So Labour really changed," and we don't have an image of that, apparently. The Telegraph has Grant Shapps says woke extremists are rife in army. The Guardian leads with overseas students in push to clear names over English test cheating. The Times has bonus ban for water bosses who break rules. And the iNews has Hunt braced for double budget blow this week. And finally, the Daily Star has the unhappy wanderer. And those were your front pages. And let's have a closer look at those stories, starting with the Telegraph, Paul. What have they got in the cover?
Shapps, woke extremists are rife in army. So this is obviously Grant Shapps, and the Cabinet Minister warned that the drumbeat of those who despise Britain is failing the army and the public. So Grant Shapps has vowed to end this poisonous woke culture that has crept into the military, and he on Monday is launching a review of diversity rules. And there's one place, there's a number of jobs where woke culture is really not of any advantage whatsoever, particularly when you need to win, or if there's any aggression involved. And we're not talking about microaggressions here. We're talking about massive aggressions
involving weapons and machine guns and things like that,
where just the sight of someone could mean they should instantly be killed. It probably isn't the best place to wear the trans flag.
Well, and also, the whole basis of diversity, equity and inclusion is critical race theory, which says that, whiteness should be abolished and, cast scorn on patriotism and all the things that an army really needs to be effective, Nicholas.
Exactly. So, obviously, critical race theory and wokeism is an antithesis to meritocracy. So the idea is if you're successful, it's because you oppress someone or your ancestors oppress someone, and that's why we have to socially engineer everything and go for reparations and all that. And this comes on the back of alarming trend that we have recently seen in the aviation industry, another industry when you want people to be there not because they are representing the demographics, or why should the aviation or the army represent the demographics of this? Aren't you supposed to? Does the British basketball team represent the demographics of the nation, or just the tallest ones who are the best at throwing the ball into the
Well,
hoop?
of course, there are certain places you don't want equality of outcome. In fact, you don't care for equality of outcome.
Yeah.
You want the outcome you want is for the very best people.
Not to be annihilated.
Forced inclusion, forced diversity in adverts, for example. I mean, I don't really mind that the only place you see white guys in adverts is when it's an advert for, something terrible like domestic abuse or gambling or, alcoholism or something like that. It's like, fine, fair enough. But when it comes to the army, when it comes to airlines, I mean, I don't want planes falling out of the sky because somebody got the job because they had to tick some box for representation.
Exactly, because you want to win the wars, because if you lose, there might be no society and no demographics at all.
Actually, that sounds pretty good. We could remake Britain
Or make Britain great again, did you say?
Be occupied by a non-woke, anti-woke army. Wink, wink. I don't say which one I'm talking about.
The Russian army's not woke. So,
Putin was just saying how much he celebrates diversity and inclusion.
Of course he does.
In his interview. No, he really genuinely did. He's an absolute waif shell, and I think that interview woke up a lot of...
He does want to include Ukraine into Russia, doesn't he? So if that is not inclusion, I don't know what is.
Very inclusive.
OK, well, moving on. What's on the front cover of The Guardian, Nicholas?
Overseas students in push to clear names over English test cheating in inverted commas. So this is a decade-long story, apparently. About 10 years ago, there was this BBC Panorama investigative, notable investigative show of note, of course, which dealt with this story. Essentially, about 35,000 overseas students were accused by the Home Office of having cheated in their English test. There were all these overseas accredited test centers, and these overseas students who wanted to come to the UK to study, as part of their visa application procedure, they had to sit for these English tests. And then it turned out that they had cheated. Some 35,000, or at least that was the allegation. Obviously, many of them were either had their visas revoked or they were removed from the UK, and a lot of them...
It was a shockingly high percentage as well. So the testing agency just concluded that 97% of the people on its English tests had cheated, which seems like quite
a bit
high,
over the top. Yeah,
that should ring alarm bells.
Yeah, and some of them are still fighting for justice. Different.
The 3%.
No, the 3% did get their visas. Hopefully, I would like to think that unless they cheated elsewhere. But we've had National Audit Office in 2019, and Immigration Tribunal judge in 2017. They all have questioned the Home Office's competence in terms of determining such a big number of people to have cheated. And basically, they have said this amounts to an abuse of power. Interestingly enough, Theresa May, who was the Home Secretary at that time, did publish her memoirs titled The Abuse of Power, ironically, but did not make any mention of this story. So we'll see how it pans out, basically.
Yeah. I mean, Paul, do you think this is people scratching around to find the next post office scandal?
Maybe. I mean, it's in The Guardian. So I'm sorry, but that's the perspective we're looking through, and it's interesting. First of all, that this was first discovered in a Panorama show on the BBC. There's no way they would air a show like that now that would be criticising people for allowing immigrants to come into the country.
No, it's criticising...
No, however, that's exactly my point. I'm not sure I'm making it very well. What I'm trying to say is this is stopping people getting into the country because we believe that they failed tests.
Yeah.
Now, failing a test would be the best way to get in, I'd imagine.
I mean, there's... absolutely.
Now tests are racist.
Tests are racist.
You don't need to bother. You just say, hey, I'm a Christian. Hey, guess what? Don't worry about the half a sheep that's been butchered in a halal way that's hanging up in my living room. I'm a total Christian.
Don't give out too much of my story.
I believe in Jason Christ.
And so I guess the suspicion could be that, Theresa May, the Home Office, there's an incentive there for them to find reasons to push these students out of the country.
Yeah, I mean, it seems high, doesn't it? 90%. I guess it's quite an easy thing because they were the test centres were based abroad. You could have people that are very good English speaking just do the tests for them.
Yeah. And the Guardian says this happened at a time when Theresa May, just like any other Tory Home Secretary, was grappling with the statistics and trying to bring down the number of immigrants into tens of thousands.
I can believe it's true, even though it's in the Guardian.
And moving on, what's on the front cover of the Eye, Nicholas?
That's with me.
Sorry, Paul.
No, it's okay. Hunt braced for double budget blow this week. Of course, we've got the budget coming up. And the reason it's a double budget blow is because the data from the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, is expected to show an increase in rate of inflation and a possible recession. Now, I'm starting to get to the point where I don't believe that the data that comes out of the ONS is not in some way corrupted sometimes, because we continually have this rhetoric all the time. We're just on the precipice of recession. And, you know, statistically, I guess we are. The numbers show that we might be. Yeah. You've only got to have a swing by a percentage point or two on a consecutive 3-month basis.
And we've certainly had lower growth than the Eurozone and also America.
We have, but then every now and again a story will come out saying the data's wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it always seems to get revised in the government's favour. As the ONS say, it's doom and gloom, we're going into recession. And then 6 months later, it's like, oh, we've actually revised it. We didn't go into recession and things aren't as bad as we said. I think the Tories are missing a trick here, because this is quite clearly going to be their last budget, and they should promise free honey and milk, because it's the Labour Party that's got to pick up. You know, if it was my last budget after 13 years, I'd be saying yes, 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 everything's free. Yeah. No one's got to MOT their car. Everyone come in, whatever it might be, and just let the next party deal with it.
You think they're being suspiciously financially rigorous and responsible?
For me, they know. They know that this is what they have to do, so the ONS data supports them, and I find that suspicious.
But free milk in Britain in 2024, everybody would be complaining that they're lactose intolerant, Nicholas.
Yeah, that's also a good point. And, you know,
have I just committed a hate crime? Again?
Well, I think what surprises me is that the people sitting at the Bank of England, they also refuse to bring down the interest rate. So, again, they are stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you want to stimulate the growth, which is agonizingly poor, but you also don't want to stimulate inflation. Yeah. And my suspicion is that none of those people live in houses with live mortgages.
No.
Because they are very
less than 20 rooms.
Yeah, exactly. They're being very reluctant to raise to bring down the interest rate, which is pain for people who hold mortgages, but also what is good for people who have big savings, so the previous generation.
And quickly, let's just do that story that's on the front cover of the Daily Star, Nicholas.
Notts and Bolton, the unhappy wanderer. This is a fascinating story. We see the picture of a football fan, a Bolton Wanderers fan, who flew apparently all the way from China, 8,000 miles, to watch Bolton Wanderers play, but the game was called off due to a waterlogged pitch. So...
a wasted journey.
The two aren't related, though. I mean, it didn't rain because he flew from China. The referee didn't hold it against this fan, you know, we're going to call the game off. So it's a great bit of Daily Star journalism, and well done for this guy.
I know what he's accusing foul play, but...
Well, no, I don't know. I mean,
well, I guess the story is, don't make a massive journey to watch a sporting event...
In January.
In January. Yeah. It could be raining in a very rainy country.
The in-flight movie was worth it, at least.
Yeah. Anyway, that's it for part one, but coming up in part two, Trump sticks the boot into NATO and the SNP's dodgy funding for Gaza. See you in a couple of minutes. Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Alabama, yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions.
No.
We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. I'm still Leo Kearse. He's still Paul Cox. And the other guy is still Nicholas DeSanto. Kicking off this section with The Guardian. And Trump has said that Russia should attack NATO allies, suggesting he doesn't really understand the basic concept of NATO, which is that all members respond to an attack on one of them. Sort of like the Musketeers, but with Apache helicopters, Paul.
Yeah, it's like Trump is constantly talking like he's in a WhatsApp group. I love it. So for context, and there is some context here, there are two things to consider. One is it's in The Guardian, so we know what perspective it's coming from. And I think that's a real key thing to consider. It's also against the backdrop of the US spending a further billions and billions on Israel, Gaza and the Ukraine. So they're in the Senate.
They haven't passed that bill.
They haven't passed that bill at the moment, but that's the backdrop of why this is going on, because unlike us, America are a long way away from Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And they care... people...
Alaska's not.
Yeah, well, Alaska's not. That's a good point. However, that's not where the war's taking place. And the people in America deem that... Quite a few of the people in America deem they've got a lot of internal problems to worry about, let alone continually funding wars elsewhere to billions. So that is an important backdrop. The other thing, of course, is that he said... one of the presidents of this, by the way, has taken place in apparently it's real. The Guardian questioned it. There was a meeting that took place at some point when Trump was president. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? To which he responded, you didn't pay, you delinquent. You're a delinquent. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You've got to pay your bills.
Yeah.
So the sentiment behind that, if you take it out of context, is perfectly OK. If you're in a kitty in a bar and you're on a stag do, everyone's got to put a tenner in, and you haven't put a tenner in, then you ain't going to get a drink. That's his point, right? So just taking it down to the gammon level. Now, if you bring that back up to world politics, it's a bit of a problem, because this is NATO, and as you rightly pointed out, NATO don't just, it's all for one and one for all. We go together. If NATO country gets attacked, then we all go. So it goes against that principle.
Yeah, Nicholas, doesn't this undermine the sort of threat, the implicit threat behind NATO, which is that, we will we will respond, all of us as one. If you step foot on one of the NATO countries, Trump is sort of like saying, well, actually, America won't, and America's the biggest dog in NATO.
But there has to be fairness as well. Now, speaking of context, this was in a political rally by Trump, and secondly. This was one of Trump's signature policies or talking points, that Americans have been taken for a ride, that America is paying for the defense of others, and we are not fools. And of course, he was proven right. The fact that NATO member states agreed the target of spending 2% of their GDP was established in 2014, before Trump even came into the White House, right? Yeah. And that was the year Russia took Crimea. Okay, and even after that, many of them, only by 2022, only a handful, literally a handful, were paying that much. Yeah. Okay, and Trump was laughed at when he stood in the UN and told the Germans, we must invest for your defense, and you are getting your gas from the Russians. They will eat you up. And you could see the videos are still there. The German delegation were laughing, belly laughing at what he was saying, and he was vindicated. And look where we are now. And NATO panicking, defense budgets being beefed up, maybe not sufficiently, but still, NATO didn't have enough ammunition to send Ukraine. They had to ratchet up the production. So Trump was proven right. If he is speaking behind closed doors to one of these, leaders or the president he's talking about, it only makes sense that say, look, guys, because they ask him, if we don't pay, would you still defend us? What is he supposed to say? Yeah, we would still defend you even if you don't pay your fair share.
And it's disingenuous for anybody to believe that nobody else would answer in a similar way. Maybe not as flamboyantly as Trump has, but if you ask that of any American leader, by the way, we're not going to pay anything and you've got to pay for all our wars, they're not just going to sit there and go, yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
and also, I mean, didn't he say this on the campaign trail? So he's doing a 90-minute monologue. Yeah. So he's going to just spin a load of nonsense.
Oh, he's got it's like an Edinburgh show. He's got some packing in there.
It's for entertainment. It's not necessarily. The actual
to be taken literally
policy that he's going to come out with. And also, before we move on, I'd just like to point out that Britain reaches and goes above that 2% threshold for NATO defence spending. So we're one of the 7 countries in NATO that does. Moving on, we've got the Mail now, and Biden's presidency increasingly resembles an outtake from Weekend at Bernie's, and it looks like the Liberal establishment are making a last-ditch attempt to replace him with someone a bit more alive before the election, Nicholas.
This is a wonderful story. The week Biden...
It is, isn't it?
I don't know where to start. The week Biden... I start with the headline. The week Biden lost the New York Times, Liberal paper's editorial board unleashes astonishing broadside warning of a dark moment as it runs back-to-back opinion pieces, knifing the elderly president after damning special counsel report. Now, this was something everyone was saying, or the Republicans were saying, until 25 minutes ago. That Biden is no longer with us, he's not with it. And they were like, no, Trump is kind of oldish as well. But now their own DOJ and the special counsel has come out and said, essentially, we cannot prosecute Biden for mishandling of secret documents, not because he didn't mishandle them, but because if we do put him on trial, the jury will find him a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory and diminished faculties. Ouch, And the New York Times has run three opinion pieces, one by the board of writers, no less, editorial board, saying that he's a crotchety grandpa, that he's been hidden by his personnel, that he's been compared to a light bulb that will only function if he is on dimmer. He has come off as pitch. These are all textual words by New York Times writers. This is not Fox News or.
I mean, this is a big difference, Paul, from when Biden first came into power, and the liberal press were fawning over him and clapping and laughing as he ate ice cream.
I don't get to use this word very often because it's a lot of old nonsense to some degree. But gaslighting. We have been gaslit by the American liberal left, the Democratic Americans, since the minute he stood to run for president. There wasn't a single well-meaning person that didn't look at that man and think, Are you having a laugh? Because and the only reason they did is because their only policy was he's better than Trump.
Yeah, or
and
he's not Trump.
And exactly. Their policy was he's not Trump, and exactly it. And the reason this is happening now, undoubtedly, is because they're starting to panic. Because if he runs again, Trump stands a very, very good chance of winning.
Yeah,
because it's basically someone who can stand up straight versus Biden.
Yeah, and they have no alternative for him. That's the problem, because he's.
But there's lots of people in the Democratic establishment that could step in. I mean, Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, or however
Pete Buttigieg. Well, that's one problem. Pete. Well, first of all, we have the second in line, who's Kamala Harris. Now, he's obliged by the laws of critical race theory and wokeism to give the reins to her. But she's even more unpopular than Biden is. You know, Kamala Harris makes Hillary Clinton look like Miss Congeniality.
I think Kamala Harris would be a better president if she actually was senile, because then at least somebody else would be pulling the strings. Anyway, moving on, we've got the Times now, and SNP leader Humza Yousaf sent money that was meant for other charities to a Hamas-linked organisation in Gaza. Seems a bit unfair, because Scotland's in a much worse state than Gaza, Nicholas.
Well, the problem is that the problem is twofold. First of all, the aid went. Basically, Scotland had this emergency humanitarian fund, but they had run out of money, so the fund was empty. So they dipped into another fund, ring-fenced for other charities, namely in Malawi and 3 other partner countries, not in Gaza. So that made the situation quite uncomfortable for other charities who had this funding ring-fenced for them.
Yeah.
But, and then
There's little kids in Bangladesh waiting for their sandwiches or whatever, and they can't get them because Humza sent the money to
Hamas.
Gaza.
And that's the key question.
In-laws live there.
To make things worse, the money goes to Gaza, and then we had this scandal where the UNRWA, United Nations work and relief agency for Palestinians, it turned out that up to 10%, 1,200 members of their staff did participate in the October 7th attacks. And that's when the UK and the European Commission, no less, several countries, Western countries, suspended their aid to UNRWA. Because who handles it? When you send money there...
But not Scotland. The SNP were like, what, you've got Hamas fighters literally on your payroll? Let's send you even more money. I mean, this is insanity, Paul.
It is insanity, and I'm quite astonished to find out, because I've been given 10% of my salary to sandwiches for Bangladesh now for about 3 years, Leo. So I'm horrified to find out it's not going there. But of course, what is it with the SNP? They always treat the public coffers as if it's their own money. Yeah. If it's not Humza Yousaf sorting out his family, in Gaza or whatever, it's the Sturgeons buying a holiday home or a car or whatever it might be, and they've just been ripping the Scottish people apart for so long now that they have no idea how to operate legitimately.
Scottish people are very sore.
They are very sore, and they like their money to be spent well, Leo. And
if there's one country on this planet that likes money being spent parsimoniously and tightly, it's Scots. So moving on, we've got the Express now, and could Reform have their first big political victory in the Wellingborough by-election, Paul?
Well, we shall see, but the Express say, game on. Reform being tipped to shock the political world with a by-election victory. Now, I think it would be a shock if Reform were to win, because Labour are clearly favourites. Now, there are some murmurings on the doorstep that maybe the Labour candidate's approach to rejoining Europe during that whole 2019 debacle with Corbyn may go against her. However, I think it's still very much in Labour's court to win. But what would be a prize for me, for them, not for me, I don't run for Reform, would be that if they were to nudge the Conservatives into third place. That would be a huge victory for Reform, a political victory.
And that could have a huge ramification for the general election.
There are some Tory insiders who say if there are not one, but 2 third places for Tories in admittedly previously safe seats, that could trigger a leadership challenge against Rishi Sunak, and that could be
That'd be great, because it's been at least 3 weeks since we had one of them. Anyway, that's it for part 2, but still to come, the church says it was scammed by fake Christian converts. See you in a couple of minutes.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Antony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying, we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. Straight back into it with The Telegraph. And after being caught running a conveyor belt of baptisms to help asylum seekers game the system and stay in the UK, the Church of England has admitted they might have been scammed. Oh, do you really think so, you wet-lipped, frock-wearing dunces? Nicholas, tell us more.
We may have been scammed by asylum seekers, admits Church of England. Where to start? I used to be an interpreter for some of these asylum seekers and their interviews because right-wing comedy in London doesn't pay the mortgage, alas. And I remember in one of these interviews, as the potential asylum seeker was reviewing the Home Office interview with the legal representation, paid by the legal aid, by the way. So the question from the Home Office was, so have you converted to Christianity now? And he was like, yes, I have. I swear to the Holy Quran, I have converted to Christianity. And I was like, what? that's a non-starter. And now we see this lady, the Right Reverend Dr. Guli, or Francis Dehqani, of Iranian origin, by the way, says that, well, there's some small percentage of abuses maybe, but it's hard to look into people's hearts, which is surprising because I thought the church should be the expert of looking into people's hearts and and spiritual motives.
And also, if you can't look into people's hearts and see what religion they are, then don't tell the Home Office that they're Christian and they should stay in the country where they can
sometimes sponsor and support their application. And by the way, it's very easy to see if people are genuine converts or not. Because if they want to join the Church of England, of all churches, of course they are not genuine. Who would want to? Churches in England are so empty. Islamic terrorists even don't, unlike in France, they don't even bother attacking them. No, but not even the English want to go to the Church of England. By the way, today, 11th of February, I understand, is the anniversary of King Henry VIII. Declaring himself.
Leo and I were just talking about that before we come on out.
This is a church created, from the real church, which was founded by St. Peter in the eternal city of Rome. This church just happened because Henry VIII wanted to go through wives like Taylor Swift goes through bad boyfriends. All right, and these guys come here, and the priest says, "Yeah, I have baptized hundreds of them in the English Channel." Surprise, surprise. Who would come to England? It's like coming to England to play basketball. If they come to join the Church of England, they are bogus. Okay, easy as that.
Okay, I mean, Paul, do you think we need to end these asylum rules that say that if you say you're Christian or if you say you're gay, then you have to stay because we can't send you back? Because for a start, if they did get sent back, it's not like he's going to get off the plane in Afghanistan, Abdulaziz, get off the plane and he's going to be like, "Hey, guess what, guys? I'm Christian now. Who wants to set up the gallows for me?" No, he's going to, if he is genuinely Christian, he'll probably keep quiet about it.
Well, to answer your initial question, yes, they should absolutely stop it. It shouldn't have been in place in the first place. The church are willfully naive when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
The bad guys know how to play the church because the church tell them exactly how naive they are on a daily basis. I mean, I've got a little bit of skin in the game here because... You're an interpreter for the Immigration Service. My father-in-law was an IO for 40 years. And we were just discussing, we were together yesterday. And
what?
Immigration officer.
All right.
Sorry, I just used the lingo without explaining myself. Yeah, so he was an IO for 40 years, and he was saying that they tried this stuff for years and years ago. But in that time, an immigration officers were much better trained.
Yeah.
They were skillful people that had been trained to deal with this stuff, and they could see straight through it.
Yeah.
And if they didn't believe it, they pointed it out and they went, "No chance, mate. You're not pulling the wool over my eyes."
Well, now, sadly,
said,
our public sector organisations are systemically woke, so they probably encourage people to knowingly cheat, and they don't see it as something to be.
Yeah, that's why they sabotaged previous Home Secretaries such as Priti Patel and Suella Braverman.
Yeah,
that's the deep state resisting against the democratically elected government.
The woke blob. Moving on, we've got The Guardian with news of Britain's involvement in the slave trade, but this isn't 400 years ago. This is British boys being enslaved right now, Paul.
It is. British boys are at risk of modern slavery. Are more at risk of modern slavery than any other group in the UK, a study shows. So the analysis found that about 2/3 were British and mostly teenagers and vulnerable adults who are forced or coerced or groomed into committing crime for someone else's benefits, much like county line stuff. And I was quite surprised to see this reported in The Guardian because they're not normally the champions of the working class people, and this overwhelmingly affects working class Brits. Yeah. And it also overwhelmingly affects white working class Brits as well.
Oh,
and
really?
we know this because The Guardian don't mention it. Because let me tell you, if this had been overwhelmingly anything else other than white, it would have got a mention in here. So I went and did a little look.
Yeah,
I did, it's absolutely true. I went and did a little look. Yes, and of course, because 82% of the UK is white, which we forget on a regular basis, naturally the overwhelming amount of these teenagers are going to be that, and they're disenfranchised. They're from poor families. They've fallen out of education because they don't realise how important it is. They just don't have that structure around them, and they just become vulnerable. And of course, these gangs take advantage of that. So, I mean, hats off to The Guardian for reporting it. But this is a big problem, and it's happening now. Unlike some of the other stuff that happened 5 million years ago, and no one else can do it, and no one was related to anyone. No one.
Although, in fairness, this slavery seems a lot easier. You're just carrying a bundle of cocaine, to Essex or whatever. It's like you don't need to spend 12 hours a day chopping down some kind of vegetable.
Yeah, it's not the conventional form of slavery that we might, associate the concept with, and that's actually the key approach here. Because Eleanor Lyons, the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, says that the modern Slavery Act needs to be modified or expanded to include this kind of criminal coercion, because then it will help prevent it better.
OK, great. Moving on, we've got the Telegraph now, and get your tiny violins at the ready. The Guardian has slumped to a £39 million loss and will have to fire staff. I can't believe that calling everything racist isn't a lucrative business model, Nicholas.
Tell me about it. So much good news tonight, right? Cost. I mean, we should be maybe unhappy for fellow journalists, but they're not journalists. They're really activists, more activists than journalists. Cost cuts loom at The Guardian amid widening losses. So they have reported a £39 million loss for the year of 2023, and that's why there's a lot of concern. And of course, this is a concern which is pretty much industry-wide, but in this case, we're talking about The Guardian, but the company Reach, which publishes The Mirror, they've had the same problems. Channel 4, another favorite outlet of mine, has announced 80% of its current workforce might have to go by the end of January. So this is a trend because people have new outlets and new ways of consumption, and that's presumably why digital advertisers... Pardon?
I've got an outlet.
Exactly. And that's why they go
don't
after
show us now, Leo.
Okay, not just that kind of outlet, but you know, you have a YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel. Yeah. There's podcasts. So many good podcasts. Non-legacy media, and no wonder legacy media goes after legacy media or pressures governments, the European Union, other governments, or social media platforms to go after these emerging forms of media because they are struggling to monetize and to cope and to adapt to this new way of news consumption or media consumption. The
Guardian does get a lot of revenue now from, I've noticed at the end of the articles it says, you've read 3,912 Guardian articles this year. Why don't you give us some money? And I always say, no, because I don't want to give them any money.
And we get paid to read Guardian articles, otherwise we wouldn't.
Yeah.
To be fair. Catherine Werner, the editor-in-chief, has tried to ease concerns, according to the Sunday Times, telling staff that they should worry but not panic. Right. That's not reassuring, is it?
That's the least reassuring
That's the least reassuring message that anyone's ever given. And let's look at our audience. I mean, these are people that are triggered by, I don't know, water or white people. You know,
the countryside is racist.
Yeah, this is exactly it. Trees are bad. You know, I mean, they sleep with a light on in case a Tory walks down the street. These people need better reassurance than that, Leo.
Well, that's it for part 3. Coming up in the final section, are you too fat to fly?
Yes.
Jesus' birth is rewritten, and have you fancied joining a cult? See you in a couple of minutes.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system. And
so there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the old tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back to Headliners. The Daily Mail now, and a Finnish airline is going to weigh passengers. I guess the Weight Watchers conference won't be held in Helsinki this year, Paul.
No, very unlikely. Scaling new heights. Finnair begins controversial passenger weigh-ins before flights amid accusations of fat shaming. And now, I know I'm the People's Gammon and I am the voice of fat people here on GB News, but this is voluntary, right? So, and I genuinely think it's a good idea. And the reason it's voluntary is because the airlines are trying to save money, and the best way to save money is to accurately calculate the weight of your load. Right. And they've been using, up till now, they've been using sort of standard that have been provided to them, so every average adult weighs X amount. And of course, that's changed a lot. And the differential between the spectrum is much greater these days. Yeah. So they're asking, and so far, 800 people have volunteered or agreed to be weighed. So when they get onto that
they're all
plane,
skinny.
Yeah, I'm guaranteeing
they're all up there, like getting on the scales, like, hey, check this out. Yeah. Whoa, I did not do well in the gym.
Unless it's a seat scale, then some people, there might be just some fat people wanting to sit down, so they sit on the scale. I know what I feel like
unless there's a trail of donuts going up to the scales.
Yummy. Just sit down, mate. Okay.
Yeah, but we're seeing more and more fat people demanding that they get 2 seats on planes. It seems a trend.
Yeah, there was this video that went viral, and it looked like a lady who had artificially actually boosted, if you like, her derriere, right? And she was demanding, in the name of fighting fat shaming, to be given 2 seats. And people were like, hey, if you can pay for plastic surgery of your Brazilian butt lift, you can maybe pay for 2 seats. Yeah. And some people are finding this, as you mentioned, it's totally voluntary and the standards are obsolete, so it's absolutely fine, in my opinion. But some people might be triggered. Well, as long as they're triggered into eating salad, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, it could save their life. We've got the Star now with a story that's familiar to comedians. A woman went to the Edinburgh Fringe and went mad, Nicholas.
I went to Edinburgh Fringe for a laugh, but ended up living in a cult for 20 years. This is the second worst thing that can happen to you if you go to Edinburgh Fringe. You might bump into a woke comedian's, show.
And that's the worst thing.
Talking about her struggle with, autism or being gay in London.
The being gay in London
so difficult. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's so difficult.
Nobody's more oppressed.
I know, or dealing with their conservative father who left them a house or something. But yeah, this is one more. If you wanted one more reason not to go to Edinburgh Fringe, this is the lady who studied in Kent. She was an English teacher apparently. Goes to Edinburgh in the 80s and bumps into this cult called Brahma Kumaris with a rigorous regime of meditation, and she ended up living in a communal house in London, in North London, for 20 years, until at some point she thought, okay, waking up every day at 3 in the morning for meditation is not for me, and she left them, and now she's publishing her memoirs.
What a completely inconsequential, boring story. We've got the Daily Mail now, and Apple's latest tech gizmo is getting some funny looks, Paul.
There's certainly are. Apple Vision Pro users say they are being tormented by curious onlookers when they wear their $3,500 augmented reality device in the street. And rightly so, Leo. If you're wandering around with one of these headsets on, pretending to type on something or, you know, having maybe a sexual experience virtually, then...
While driving a Tesla.
While driving a Tesla. And they have been caught driving doing this as well. I mean, it's basically a way to find the stupidest people in society with the most amount of money.
That's a great market, surely, if you want to sell some magic beans.
Hopefully it's just a fad like Apple Watches, you know, people who bought Apple Watches at some point because they didn't want to bother, you know, taking their phone out of their pocket to see if they had received a message, they had to watch it here.
Well, they didn't have any friends, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So if you make yourself a target, then don't blame the society.
Well, quickly, let's see if we can squeeze in these next two stories. The Express now, with the remake we've waited 2,000 years for, Nicholas.
Jesus Christ's birth story rewritten after lost Gospels reveal forgotten part of Bible. So in the New Testament, officially, we have a 27 book. That's a canon, right? But then we had, in 1945, we had some so-called Gnostic or Gnostic Gospels, depending on how you pronounce them, found in Egypt. About 52 gospel texts.
Remember when I said quickly?
Yeah.
So this is the
Putin
history of Russia.
That was good though. But 5 seconds. So this is these books or these texts address the gap which was in 12 until the year 30 of Jesus' life.
Okay, cool. Well, finally, before we go, we've an intact Roman egg has been found. I didn't know Romans laid eggs.
No, I didn't either. Perhaps it'll hatch one. World first intact Roman egg laid 1,700 years ago has been discovered by archaeologists. And the scan has found that there are some innards within this. It was found at the bottom of a wishing well. And, you know,
amazing.
We're all on tenterhooks.
Probably a Roman squatting over the well that laid it. Well, the show is nearly over, so let's take another quick look at Monday's front pages. The Daily Mail leads with, "So Labour really changed?" You'll have to trust me on that. The Telegraph has, Shaps says, "Woke extremists are rife in army." The Guardian leads with, "Overseas students in push to clear names over English test cheating." The Times leads with, "Bonus ban for water bosses who break rules." The iNews has, "Hunt braced for double budget blow this week." And finally, the Daily Star has "The Unhappy Wanderer." And those were your front page, and that's all we have time for. Thank you to my guests, Paul Cox and Nicholas DeSanto. Andrew Doyle is back tomorrow at 11 p.m. with myself and Cressida Wetton. And if you're watching at 5 a.m, stay tuned for breakfast and have a great week. Good night.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. The next few days, the theme really is clear spells and showers around, and we have that really as we end Sunday as well. Showers pushing their way in from the west, quite frequent for some western districts. Some clearer spells, though, further towards the east, and a much drier night overall, though, for the far northeast here in Shetland. It is going to be a much wetter one with that band of rain sweeping through. Underneath some of those clear spells, though, temperatures will just drop off a bit. Low single figures for many of us, and a patchy frost is possible first thing on Monday morning. Maybe some icy stretches as well, where we do have those showers around. We will continue to see those showers pushing their way in. They will be most frequent and heaviest for northwestern areas. Some quite blustery winds around here at times also, but generally further east and south, you'll more likely stay dry throughout the day with a decent number of sunny spells in there as well. A relatively pleasant start to the new week. Temperatures around 6 to 11 degrees Celsius is pretty much where we'd expect them to be for this time in the year. On Tuesday, got an area of low pressure just to the north that will again bring some very breezy, blustery showers for Scotland, but a ridge of high pressure allows for a drier, finer start for much of Northern Ireland, England and Wales, with some sunny spells once again. But we will start to see the cloud thickening up from the southwest, with outbreaks of rain eventually arriving, turning breezier as well. But in amongst all of this, we have milder air sweeping its way in, so temperatures will be on the rise as we head towards the middle part of the week, seeing mid-teens for some of us as we head towards Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of three abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures, endless red tape. As Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain, they've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You're watching and listening to GB News with me, Sam Francis. It's just gone 7 o'clock, and we start this hour with the latest news in the Hamas-Israel conflict. In a call this evening, the US president has urged the Israeli Prime Minister to halt his planned invasion of the Gazan city of Rafah. Joe Biden said that it shouldn't go ahead without a credible plan in place to protect the 1 million people seeking shelter there. It follows Biden's recent comment that Israel's response in Gaza is, he said, over the top. Meanwhile, here in the UK, the government is also warning that there could be catastrophic consequences for civilians if an assault on Rafah goes ahead. However, the Israeli Prime Minister has told reporters today that enough of the 132 remaining hostages are alive to warrant a ground offensive. Well, earlier tanks and bulldozers, you can see there if you're watching on TV, were seen operating along the Israel-Gaza border. And that comes after at least 44 people, including several children, died yesterday in what the Palestinians claim was an Israeli airstrike. Here in the UK, the family of murdered teenager Brianna Ghey have today been holding a vigil to mark the first anniversary of her death. Earlier, I spoke to our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper, who was at that gathering.
Well, 1 year on from the tragic death of Brianna Ghey, hundreds of people have gathered here in Warrington for a vigil in her memory. We heard from several of Brianna's friends who spoke, bringing tears to the eyes of the crowd as they remembered their friend. We also heard from the head teacher at Brianna's school. We finally heard from Brianna's mother, Esther, who spoke emotionally and emotively about the loss of her daughter. Here's what she had to say.
Brianna was an amazing, unique and joyful teenager. I will be forever thankful that I was lucky enough to spend 16 years with her. She taught me so much and gave me so much happiness and love. If there's one piece of advice that I can give to any parent, it would be to hug your children tight and never stop telling them that you love them.
In other news, 124 migrants crossed the English Channel on Saturday in 3 small boats. That's according to new Home Office figures out today. The latest arrivals bring the total for this year so far to just over 1,500. That's down from the 2,072 at this time last year, but up on the figure in 2022. Apart from the latest crossings, small boats had not been intercepted since the 31st of January. The Prime Minister, you'll remember, has made stopping the boats a key pledge of his leadership as the country approaches the general election. The departure of the Royal Navy aircraft carrier, HMS Prince of Wales, was cancelled this afternoon at the last minute. It was about to set sail to replace its sister ship, which was also forced to cancel its deployment due to an issue with the propeller. The £3 billion vessel was to take over leading the largest NATO exercise since the Cold War. However, despite people lining the walls of Portsmouth Harbour to watch the 65,000-tonne warship set sail, it failed to leave the jetty. And finally, the King has attended church in Sandringham this morning, the first time since his cancer diagnosis. His Majesty was seen walking alongside Queen Camilla this morning. That's after last night thanking the nation for their overwhelming support in his first public message since the diagnosis announcement. The monarch said such kind thoughts are of great comfort and encouragement to him. Buckingham Palace have said that he is facing a form of cancer, but that it's unrelated to his recent prostate treatment. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen if you're watching on television, or if you're listening on radio, go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The Royal Society of Literature fails to defend free speech. Tucker Carlson interviews Vladimir Putin, and we ask that age-old question, should airlines weigh their plumper passengers? This is Free Speech Nation. Welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Andrew Doyle. This is the show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics. And of course, we're going to have the latest from those lovable culture warriors. You know the ones I mean. Activists of every persuasion who somehow believe that throwing insults and lying about people is going to persuade them to change their minds. Well, good luck with that. Anyway, coming up on the show tonight, Professor Jo Phoenix will be here to tell us about the significance of her success in a gender-critical discrimination case against the Open University. And how would a potential Labour government handle the conflict between women's rights and the demands of trans activists? Well, Joan Smith will be here to discuss that. And Shara Ali will be here to tell us about how a court found that he was discriminated against by the Green Party over his gender-critical beliefs. And, of course, myself and my fantastic panel will be here answering questions from this rather lovely studio audience.